Hi, welcome back to the Trial by Jennifer podcast series. My name is Jennifer Butterfield, your host, and today I have a very special guest, Arie Brish, who also happens to be my former professor at St. Edward's University. Welcome, Arie. I'm so glad to have you. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
And thanks for having me. So for the record, Jennifer was my student, and the name is perfect because Jennifer was a firecracker of the class. So I love the name.
Thanks.
So back to business. I grew up in Israel. I went to school in Israel, did my electrical engineering degree EE with a specialty of computer science. Once I graduated, there were two career choices. One is work for one of the electronic companies local in Israel, and the other one, the semiconductor industry from the Bay Area, just started to come to Israel. Intel was the first one. There was another company, National Semiconductor, that came to Israel. So out of curiosity, I would think I signed up or applied for a job there, and somehow they accepted me. People thought I'm crazy because the perception about American companies back then in Israel was, hey, you start with them, the pay is good, but they will fire you 3 months later. So the pay was good. It was like double the standard of local companies in Israel, and I loved the technology aspect and the innovation aspect. So it turned out it kind of defined my career for the rest of my life, and defined my relationship with the U.S. business. Back then, when I graduated, I didn't even know how to spell United States of America, but that defined my entire future. So that was step one in the career, and I spent the next 25 years in the semiconductor, back and forth between the US and Israel. Motorola Semiconductor was based here in Austin. They hired me out of National to start their operation in Israel. So over the years, Israel became a technology center for the world, but back in the 1970s, 1980s, we kind of started it partnering with different American companies. So Motorola Semiconductor started their operation in Israel. They hired me to be one of the core team to start it. After I finished my MBA in Israel, they transferred me to Austin, and the rest is history. I'm still here 35 years later. I'm still here.
I'm so glad that you are too.
And that's how I got to meet Jennifer. Otherwise, we never know about each other.
Well, I just, one of the things I have a feeling we may be talking a lot about books at various points in this podcast, but one of the books that I was asked to read for Arie's class was The Startup Nation, and it is a fantastic read. I'll be sure to post a link of it, and we've also got his own best-selling book, Lay an Egg, Make Chicken Soup. And we'll be sure to post links to both of those books in the description. But, I learned so much about Israel through reading that book, and, how people go into the conscription for at least 2 years. And then that kind of determines their career trajectory. And I'm so glad that you've made it to Austin and that you are a teacher at St. Edward's University. And I had the pleasure of taking your class because I learned so much. And I was so grateful that you're willing to make some time to come on the podcast. I am always asking my guests this question because it is a personal finance podcast. What was the conversation around personal finance like in your home growing up?
Okay, so middle class is different in different countries and different stages of history. So when I grew up, it was Israel, a young country. My parents were Holocaust survivors, started from scratch. 70% of the country were Holocaust survivors starting from scratch. So they felt very blessed to have a 500 square foot apartment and be able to afford some food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So but one thing they always almost brainwashed is no matter how low your income level is, always save a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember my mother used to say in a concentration camp, you get a slice of bread once a week or something. She would cut it to pieces, put in her pockets, so she has something to eat every day. So that kind of, and if you think about it, the moral of the story is, even if your income level is very low, you should think about the future all the time and save a little bit for the future. So that was a brainwash that I still remember. The other part is the importance of education, which is, we all know that that's an important thing for your future personal finance. So that was the two number one priorities growing up was always save a little and always invest in education no matter what.
That's beautiful. Wow. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I can only imagine the story about your mother is just, it touches my heart.
Yeah,
Profound.
and she was a teenager back then. She was like
Wow.
15, 16 in a concentration camp, a female. You just imagine what
Wow.
kind of survival skills you have to
Oh,
have to get over that period.
oh my gosh. It's just a miracle that you're here to tell about it. I mean, really, and I can only imagine like how deeply ingrained those ideas of saving and well, you and I both know the importance of education and how
Yeah.
much I know how much it's changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way that I think about the world is um, tremendously altered through education. So, wow, okay, that's wonderful. I know.
They were never they always they were never a high income household, but if I needed any help in my education, they didn't save on it. So if I get a B on something, they immediately hire a tutor to take me from a B to an A.
Wonderful. Yeah, those are the important things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. And I mean, you'll carry your knowledge with you everywhere you go.
Right. Yes, yes. That's something they cannot take away.
Right, exactly. Um, thank you for sharing that. That's remarkable. I know that just based on what I know about you and the research that I've done too, because I knew you in a professor capacity, but looking at your professional career and the trajectory of that, can you share a little bit about what you do with business consulting and your company?
Yeah, yeah. So consulting could mean different things to different situations. In my case, I was so involved from the beginning of my career and in the recent years with commercializing new products and new services, both in high tech. Obviously, high tech is always every 2 or 3 years you need to come up with a new product, otherwise you die. But later on, in the past 10, 15 years, I became involved in other industries, clean tech, even jewelry, believe it or not. What else? Water, cybersecurity, construction, so different industries. And I saw the common thread in the challenges in commercializing new products.
Mhm.
That's what triggered writing this book. I said, oh, you can learn across from You can be a hospital and you can learn from an airline, or be a restaurant and learn from a hair salon. And so once I realized there is this common thread among different industries of the challenges in launching or commercializing new products and services, I started to write about it. At the beginning, it was just blogging on LinkedIn, but then I realized I had enough material to put it in a book.
Perfect.
So that's how the book started.
I love it. I love that you're able to kind of connect the dots. I think that's so important. It's such a quality leadership skill, and also one that is very analytical and thinking, and being able to see, how to streamline and make things more effective. I'm curious because I saw, that you've successfully raised over $100 million for corporate projects. And can you share a little bit about some of the key strategies that you've employed in doing that?
Yeah, so the two phases in these different projects. One, when I was in an R&D in Israel, the corporate projects that we had to do were more about technology development. Back in the days when semiconductor chips became very complex, you couldn't do it just on a pencil and paper. You had to develop computer programs that will help you catch mistakes and what have you. So back in those days, we started to develop, and today you have this it's called computer engineering programs, or computer-aided design programs. There are different names. So today you can buy it off the shelf, but back then it was very beginning of the industry, so we had to develop it in-house.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of all these corporate projects, so to speak, developing all these computer programs to help semiconductor designers do their job. The second part, after I moved to the US, I was hired to set up a process of new products initiatives at Motorola Semiconductor. So it was something totally different, partnering with customers to develop products for their customers. So the challenge there is to review basically 20 customers a month asking you to do something, but you can do only 1 or 2 per month. Mm-hmm. So back then the challenge was to review the customer's requests and develop a system to make a decision which customer request you take or decide to do, and dealing with the 19 different customers you had to disappoint by not accepting their request. So that was a big challenge, how to do it, how to filter or how to decide what ideas to pursue, and how to do it without insulting or without offending the other 19 customers. You have to go back and tell them, oh, we cannot do that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm curious because my next question was going to be, what challenges have you encountered with corporate fundraising and how you overcame them? And I'm curious, like, I guess what would be the criteria with that?
Yeah, so the corporate world is different than a startup venture fundraising. It's more about corporate politics. You have to lobby for promote whatever your idea you're trying to promote. The corporate has tons of money. It's just a matter of lobbying for your idea and competing with other departments that all try to get some, their hands in the corporate pockets,
right,
so to speak. So you have to justify the project you're trying to promote or lobby for. And I think one important lesson learned is you have to lobby for whatever you lobby for, lobby behind the scenes. So when you walk into the decision-making meeting, you need to know what people think already ahead of time. So the trick is to meet one-on-one with all the different executives that are coming to the meeting and are responsible for making the decision. Lobby with them ahead of time. Don't surprise them when you walk to the meeting. You walk to the meeting knowing what each one is thinking, and if they have some feedback on change here, change that, whatever, you change it before the meeting. So when you walk to the meeting, you know you have the majority support of the people that need to vote on or make the decision.
That's brilliant. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think
so. We talked before. It's all about people, right? So yeah, even you could be 100% right, the brilliant idea. If you don't have the support of the people that needs to write the check, it's not going to happen. So that's the people part of the process is very important.
Yeah, I can totally get behind that strategy. And, you know, I have employed it I would say that or one of my strong suits. And so I've seen the effectiveness of that strategy firsthand. I'm
a witness of your people's skill yourself.
Yeah, well, and likewise, I think that there's a couple of things that you mentioned that I want to touch on, like your LinkedIn presence and definitely the book. But before we get into that, I'm curious, like, were there any specific industries or sectors of the corporate world that you found particularly, you know, challenging or rewarding in terms of, you know, offering your time and energy to those?
Yeah, so we talked about different industries have different cultures. Okay, in the high-tech industry, the culture is people are hungry for more innovation. So it's very easy to sell new ideas to a technology customer because those people are naturally curious about new technologies. You come to them with a new gadget, they will test it the next day and you'll get the feedback the same week. Other industries I worked for are totally different. They have a pregnancy time is much longer and they are much more conservative. I did a lot of work in the energy business or utility business. Okay, so you come to them with a new gadget, they are very reluctant to try it because if it's not working, it can black out entire electricity in a big city or state of Texas, and so you can offer that for free for them to try. They still will not try it until there is some proof of concept process you have to go through that could take 2 or 3 years. Where in the semiconductor industry it was like days and you get your feedback.
Right. That makes total sense. I mean, I guess some are a much quicker turnaround, right? And I think tech seems to continue, and perhaps that has something to do with Moore's law, or, you know, just the processors, you know, becoming more and more powerful in less and less time, and just the speed of that industry progressing is
yeah. So the people in the technology, they just give me more innovation.
Right.
In the for example, energy or utilities, it's kind of counterintuitive. The more innovative your product is, the more reluctant they are to adapt it because it's out of the box of way of doing things. So it's a different industry, different cultures.
Totally. And I think it's just so fascinating. I'm wondering, you know, if we'll see the energy industry, like, for example, if more and more tech as it becomes integrated there, if you know, they'll be more willing to adopt other ideas and innovations more readily. That's an interesting thing that I didn't know. And so thank you for sharing that. And
yeah, the due diligence process is much longer than
and
medical field is the same. I mean, if you come with a new medication, it takes several years to approve it.
Right. That makes total sense. Yeah, I'm seeing the connection there. I'm curious because I also know that you've raised over 15 million for startup venture capital investments. What criteria are you looking for, you know, in potential startup investments, and like how has that changed maybe from back when you first started to today? And curious about, you know, I think there are probably quite a bit people in the audience of this podcast that are like considered like the zillennial generation. A lot of them are wanting to get into, you know, starting their own company and are probably looking for investors. And so I'm curious, you know, if you could speak to that for their benefit.
Yeah. So one of the obstacles, so going back to the corporate world, one of the obstacles in the corporate world is if you have a good idea or a new idea, one of the fears or the obstacles is the cannibalism with legacy products. So it's kind of a corporate politics thing. If I'm making these glasses and somebody comes with a new idea to do better glasses or whatever, the executives that are responsible for the legacy glasses will push back and say, "Oh, you're killing my business. I'm not going to vote for it, or I'm going to oppose it." When you go in a startup world, you don't have that problem because you start from scratch. Okay, so there is no issue of legacy products or competing with legacy products. What I personally like is products or ideas to be totally different. Like the new buzzword is blue ocean strategy, but we started with the same concept. We didn't call it blue ocean strategy back in the days. We called it orthogonal differentiation. So find an angle that will differentiate your product in a way that it will not compete against your competition, but will create a totally new market.
Right. Disruptive.
So that's what I like when I look at, if they tell me it's 20% cheaper or 20% better or 20% this or that, it's not very attractive. It's only when it's so different that you are going to be a monopoly, at least initially. Tesla is an example. I mean, they were a monopoly in electrical vehicle for several years. They created that market, right?
Totally.
So that's an example of an idea that is so different that you create your own market niche.
Like AI, like ChatGPT is disrupting, you know, and I mean, it's a huge disruptor right now. I mean, we're looking at like
exactly
taking out like assistants and like all these different I think that the innovation, and I remember learning quite a bit about the blue ocean strategy in your course, but I think that I think it requires a very creative mind, right? To think outside the box and not, because I think, and that's one of the things I appreciate so much about my education is it taught strategies to brainstorm and think outside the box. Because I think it's like, that is really the way to make a way for yourself in the world. It's like the competition, I think, is like, you'll be in competition with somebody forever, but until you create that product or service that's going to generate its own field and its own following of competitors. Uber
is another example. Uber, people took taxis. So Uber did not invent anything. They did not invent automobiles. They did not invent GPS. They did not invent credit cards, but they created a new service integrating all these technologies into a new service that did not exist before.
And Airbnb too, like
Airbnb, another example. Yeah,
disrupted the hotel market. Yeah,
yes.
I'm curious, since we're on the topic of startup ventures, how do you approach risk assessment and due diligence when considering suggesting a potential startup for investment?
Yeah. Every startup has its risk. So that's how you call it. The reason you call it venture capital is it's a risky investment. So number one is a good idea. If you believe in an idea, number two is the market for it. But number three, or maybe the most important, is if you believe in the team, you believe in the people that has to execute on that idea. And I've worked with dozens of startups. In many cases, the ones that failed because of people. Something went wrong with the people. In many cases, either the co-founders at some point did not get along with each other, or one of the co-founder, there is a process in a startup where you go without a paycheck, right? So you make an assumption, okay, I can survive 6 months without a paycheck, but guess what? It takes 15 months before you raise money to get you a paycheck. So in many cases, some people will drop off because they need to find a paying job.
Right.
That was in many cases what killed many of the startups I worked with in the past.
That makes total sense.
Either founders don't get along, or one of the founders need a paycheck and had to drop off. And in a large company, going back to a large company, if you have a project with 50 people, one person drop off, it's not a disaster. But if you have a startup with 3 people, one drops off, it could kill the whole thing.
Well, it brings up an interesting, and this is kind of going off script, but I'm curious, what do you think makes a good foundation for a business partnership? I have a lot of friends who are, entering into their first business partnership, and it's almost like, I don't know, I kind of liken it with like a good roommate or something. I don't,
absolutely.
Somebody who isn't a close friend, right? You're not like jeopardizing a friendship, but I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the chemistry between the co-founder is one thing, like a roommate, as you said. The other thing is the financial resilience. So you have to have a conversation about, Mr. Co-founder, how long can you be without a paycheck? And if they tell you 6 months, that's probably not long enough. Because it always takes longer. Okay. So there is a solution for that. I mean, you can either have a part-time job somewhere, do a Uber driver or deliver pizza or something. You can have a spouse that brings a stable paycheck, so you can go without a paycheck for a while. There is ways around it, or do the startup thing, at least at the beginning, keep your job and do the startup thing at nights or the weekends. There are different ways to do it, to overcome it. Don't just assume, okay, I'm going to quit my job. In 6 months, I'm going to raise money and get some paycheck.
Right. Totally.
And after you raise the money, by the way, the initial money you get is not enough for a good paycheck.
Right.
So if you're used to get a $10,000 a month job, the initial money in a startup will give you a $2,000, $3,000 paycheck initially, at least. So you have to take all these things into account. So you can trust. I worked with people that I loved and trusted and everything, but then if they need the money to put food on the table or send their kids to college or whatever, no matter how much you trust them and how much good friends you are, and I had several things that we're still friends, even though the startup part of it or the business partnership fell apart. We still remain friends.
I would hope so, but I know that's not always the case. I've seen it
Right.
firsthand.
Yes.
And yeah, I think supplementing income in the initial stages, and I think there are, right? There are phases, and
Yeah.
hopefully it does well, and then you double over and do it again,
Yeah.
ideally. I I think that's really important to consider, and it wasn't the first thing that came to mind. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I know you serve as a director for several boards, and you're considered a thought leader for Forbes Technology Council. And can you share some of the most groundbreaking tech innovations, um, like in terms of the impact on personal finance that you've experienced or been exposed to in some of these roles?
Yeah. So as we talked before in the previous discussion, there is always impact on your personal finance that you have to take into account. So it's joining a new business is always a dent in your personal short-term personal finances that you have to take into account. So the only way to do it is if there is a promising improvement in the personal finance farther out in the future, long term. So that's kind of tying back to the previous conversation we had. None of the startups I have been involved with has any impact. The product is not a personal finance product, but one of the startups, the guy took a home equity loan to fund his startup, and then he didn't take any salary for like 2 years.
Wow.
So actually, that's why I fell in love with his dedication.
Right.
Because I knew that he's this resilience and dedication to win, and now he's doing well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how is he doing now? I mean, the belief in the product when you make that sacrifice, I think, is a demonstration.
Yeah, in this particular case, I believed in the person more than I believed in the product. Yes.
I think that really, in the long run, will be the distinguishing factor when it comes to success, is the ability to keep your feet moving, I think,
Yeah. There are many startups that I fell in love with the product, but they failed because the people side of it didn't work out. In this particular case, I fell in love with the person and it's still going.
That is so neat. Yeah, I think that what I'm hearing you say is like good character is really the make it break it deciding factor, and your team. And so choosing that wisely, no matter what position you're approaching the venture from, I think is crucial. That's fascinating. And also, I would say, like, not expected. I think most people are like, oh, well, it's this or it's that, and it's like, really, it's the people, your human capital. Okay, I want to get to the book before we wrap up the podcast. And I know you've got a very busy schedule, and so I want to talk a little bit. I mean, you're a published best-selling author, which is remarkable. And can you talk a little bit about what drives the best-selling book, and then what your inspiration was for starting it?
Yeah. So as I said, the book just happened. It's like being pregnant and you don't know that you're pregnant. So
yeah.
So the book just happened. I mean, from just my blogging and what have you. Going back to the people thing, by the way, I had one of the reviewers of the book. I didn't even try to make it a people book, but one of my reviewers said every chapter talks about the people aspect, whether it's marketing, whether it's finance, whether it's operation, everything you focus on the people, and I didn't even do it purposely.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Bestseller it's all a comparison of the different genres of the books. This book is, business venture. So I don't compete with Michelle Obama, right? She sold 10,000 a day.
Yeah.
And I sold 10,000 in 5 years. The book exists, maybe, because it's compared to the other books in the same genre.
Mm-hmm.
So it did very well in that particular thing. I was even number one several cases or several weeks. Amazon has a way to track almost by the day. So
Yeah.
there were many days, I would say I was number one, but always in the top 50, which is good, thinking that there is maybe hundreds of books in that category.
Absolutely. I also want to talk a little bit about your LinkedIn following. You have like tens of thousands of followers, and can you talk a little bit about the organic growth with that? And I recently turned my profile into like a professional mode, and I have it with all my different platforms that I'm present on. But I'm curious, how that came to be what it is today, yeah.
So that has to do with the fact that I did many consulting jobs or freelancing jobs, and most of it was in a business development part of the commercialization process. So it was very proactive on my side. So if I have a project in solar energy, I go to LinkedIn and try to find all the solar energy executives I want to put my hands on, and I invite them, which is against the rules, but I invite them. In many cases, they accept. In many cases, they don't. And then 3 months later, I'm doing cybersecurity. So I had to go and look for cybersecurity people and invite them cold. And a few years later, I wake up and I have close to the maximum 30,000 people, which is the maximum that LinkedIn allows. So now I trim back. So I discontinue my contacts and people that are not relevant for the business. So in the past, people invite me cold and I accept, everybody. Now I go back and see, okay, if you are a lawyer in Pakistan that's totally irrelevant for my business, I would disconnect this person unless I had some relationship with the person before, some communication. I keep that. But if it's a person that I never had any communication, just has been a contact for 10 years with no business synergy and no communication. One thing I do, by the way, I made an habit to send, congratulations on your new job or happy birthday or da-da-da. And
people.
Yeah, and people, if somebody doesn't respond after 3 attempts of happy birthday, I disconnect that person. So every week I go and disconnect like 20 or 30 people because they never responded to my happy birthday.
Well, I love getting your messages, and I think that personal touch in a professional environment.
Are we connected?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it just opens doors, and I mean,
exactly.
It's so important, and I really, really appreciate all that you've shared. I feel like you just have such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom to offer a conversation and really an audience of people. And so I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. I was waiting for you to invite me.
Oh my gosh, I was so pleased. I thought you were too busy. I was like, you were one of the first people that I thought of when I started the podcast. I was like, oh, he's a big shot, I don't know if he'll come on, but then you reached out and I was so humbled and honored. And I just feel so grateful because, like I said, I just feel like your network of people, your knowledge, your experience, all of those things contribute to just such a wealth and so much value for my listeners and for me too. So thank you again.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for those of you who are going to be tuning in next week, join us Wednesday at 10 a.m., our usual time. I will have a Austinite who is just featured in a CNBC article on personal finance and how she's doing it. And so you won't want to miss that. And for those of you who are going to tune in, I'll see you next week.
Okay, adios.